Hello, welcome to part two of our discussion on survey design. And in this session, we'll be looking at determining the appropriate, survey method. Last time, if you had followed us, you will discover that we did only the introduction to survey. So we'll be looking at determining the appropriate survey method. And then after that, we'll follow the discussion as specified here. Now, it's important to note that there are several methods for conducting surveys. The appropriate method for conducting survey would depend on a good number of factors. And these factors include things like the survey objective, it includes the target population, the time frame that have been mapped out for the survey, and of course the budget that is involved. In this discussion, we want to look at two major types of survey methods. We will look at the oral survey and we'll look at the electronic survey. Whether one is using oral survey or electronic survey depends on a good number of factors also. So let's start with the first one that has to do with oral survey. Oral survey are considered as more personal form of survey. It's more personal than written or electronics method. And it can actually involve the use of personal interviews or telephone survey. Personal interview could be electronics based, it could be non-electronics based. If you look at the pictures here, this is a survey I led a team that we did somewhere in Soka in Enugu State, and for certain reasons the sponsor needed us to use hard copy, and so it was not electronics based. I also led a team somewhere in northern Ghana, Tamale, Ghana, where we did this survey and we had to use tablets, and that is electronics based. So it can either be electronics based or non-electronics based for this kind of personal interview. It can also be done oral interview. It can also be done using telephone. So if you are using oral interview, it depends on a lot of things. One, you want to be sure the location is convenient, where you can meet the enumerator. And then it also depends on the person you want to interview and then the personnel you have available. Telephone interview can be done using your mobile phone. What do we mean by that? I have a set of questions. They use it a lot in customer survey, customer satisfaction survey. I have a good number of questions, and we have list of customers who have been patronizing us. We put a call across to each of them, and while they respond, I will tick the boxes. I can also decide to meet with them on different platforms like Zoom, like Google Meet, like Team, and discuss with them to get feedback. This is also a form of survey. It has advantages, it has disadvantages. The advantages include the fact that there is this personal contact. When you are meeting your enumerator personally, you may be able to explain you may be able to explain the question better, and be sure that the person is responding as based on the expectation of the questions. Otherwise, if you send it out to people, different individuals could interpret your question in different ways, and based on their personal interpretation, they give you a response. Even though in designing questionnaire, we try to reduce such kind of variance. All right? It also has a high rate of response. The likelihood that people you meet personally will respond to you is higher than people you just send your questionnaire to and you expect their response. Personal interview is also typical in rural areas where you have to meet farmers who probably do not have electronics gadgets, and yet you want to get this information, where you need to meet farmers or people who dwell in rural areas that perhaps they don't understand English or in any other standard language available. They want to hear it in their local dialects, and somebody from the community may need to interpret it to them, physically meeting them. It also used when you have sensitive issues to talk about. All right, issues that are very sensitive and you want to interview. If, for instance, you are looking at domestic violence in homes, and you want to ask people question, I mean, this could be quite sensitive, and so if you meet them personally, you'll be able to know when to stop and when there is that nodding that you can go ahead. It's also suitable for special groups that you want to interact with. For instance, you are interviewing people who are into something like a particular crime, and you want to find out what is motivating them. Okay, where you use what we call a kind of snowball sampling. You meet one person, you interview the person, and when the person has confidence in you that they are safe, they will be able to refer you to another person in their group. And then with that reference, because it's coming from a member of their group, the next person will be able to give you audience. But then it has a lot of cost implication. And if care is not taken, the attitude of the enumerator, the person who is conducting the interview, can influence the response from the audience. Okay? So let's quickly look at the other one. So basically, what we call the oral interview can be physical. All right? It can have to do with face-to-face or in-person interview, where the interviewer meets with the respondent physically in a place, and then you're able to present the question to the individual. Either you read it and the person responds, or the person is filling the form, and giving you the response and is able to interact with you. Now, the electronics one, the electronic survey method, has to do with using electronics device. With the growth of internet and availability of different electronics devices, it becomes easier to conduct electronic survey. Electronic survey could includes computer direct interview. Computer direct interview, it includes email interview. It can also include hybrid electronics survey, which has to do with email interview and computer direct interview combined. Now, when we say computer direct interview, we are talking about a situation where you design your form, your questionnaire, in an electronics form. You could use Google Form, you could use SurveyMonkey, you could use SurveyBee, you could use ODK. There are several kinds of platform where you can mount or design your questionnaire on those platforms, and these things can be sent out to people, make available to the enumerators, and the enumerators will respond to you. Okay, so I can design my questionnaire in SurveyMonkey, I can design it in SurveyBee, ODK, Google Form, and I'm the one holding this device. The person who is conducting the survey is holding the device, and you go to meet the enumerators, and the enumerators gives you responses which you enter into this device. Computer direct interview. All right, now I can also design it and send it electronically, either as an email or using a WhatsApp or using other form of communication, where I do not need to meet this individual. The enumerator responds to me. Okay? Responds to that design you have made available online and send back to you. So the hybrid is where I design this Google form, and send it via email or send it through WhatsApp and people respond to it. So there is that communication in terms of sending it to the individual. All right. So it has a lot of advantages. Of course, it also has its own disadvantage when you want to use electronics survey. One of the major advantages, it has is the issue of cost. It saves your costs, and also is easy to edit. It's also easy to analyze. We've had cases where we just sent design our questionnaire and we sent it to somebody to check, and the person quickly comes back and said, this is not correct. Some of my students, when they are designing this kind of survey, in most cases they include me as an editor. So from my end, I can look at what they have done and be able to make corrections. So it's easy to edit, faster transmission in terms of time. The responses can also be quite high because you can send it to a good number of people at the same time within your target population. It equally eliminates the issue of interviewer bias. Sometimes when people are looking at you and you are asking them certain questions, because of personal bias, they may not want to give you that response. But when the individual is behind the gadget and you just to point or click certain things, you may be able to get better responses from the survey. Of course, it can give you opportunity of designing your questionnaire graphically such that it becomes easier for people to identify exactly what you mean through the pictures or graph presented in the survey. The disadvantages are also there. The demographic you can reach are limited. If, for instance, you want to reach rural farmers, you want to reach certain kind of persons, you may not be able to reach them. Not also suitable for specialized survey, like I had mentioned. There are farmers that are in developed countries who are gadget-based. It is easier to interact with such people. But when it comes to less developed economies, and then you need to meet with the farmers in the rural areas, it could be quite difficult. Now, there are different criteria for choosing the method you want to use. First has to do with the population and the location of the population. Okay, the population, and then the second has to do with sampling issues and also administrative issues. We'll look at these three things and we'll be fine. Imagine you have this large population here and you have to interview them. You run into serious crisis trying to do it. And that is why we do sampling. The populations are listed, and then based on certain criteria in sampling, the certain number of persons are selected from the population and they are interviewed. Based on the findings from the sample, we're able to make inference, intelligent gaze about the population itself. So the essence of sampling is to reduce the people we're going to interview, but they should be able to represent the population from where they are drawn. And then the other consideration given in selecting your survey has to do with administrative issues. So we'll look at these three issues now, and that will be all in this class. The first is the issue of population. The target population, of course, that is has to do with the set of units to be studied. That's the target population. The set of units to be studied. Okay? And then you want to check how accessible this target population is. And to check them, there are key questions you need to ask. You quickly consider whether this population can be, is something that can be counted. Is it an infinite population, or a population that has a particular number you can count? Like if I say we have 500 persons here, that is fine. But if the number of people in that population is not known, it also determines the kind of survey you can do with them. And then you equally check the challenges of language. There are places, I know there was a time we had a study, and this study was to happen in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Zambia, in Mali. I was actually assisting the person in charge of this survey, my supervisor, but he speaks French. So he was able to handle the team that managed Mali and Zambia, and then I coordinated Nigeria and Ghana. So you consider language issues before you select the kind of method you want to use. You equally check whether there is geographical restriction. The picture you see here is what happened somewhere in Beji, in Boki local government of Cross River, Nigeria. We, in drawing sample, there are certain things you need to do. We had to use the enumeration area from Bureau of Statistics of Nigeria. We got the enumeration area, and using certain scientific methods, we drew our sample, and this sample we didn't determine, we didn't know where they are by the time we selected them. So we now began to visit them, and one of the communities happened to be Baji local government, Baji in Boki local government. By the time we got there, the community was already disconnected because there was a bridge linking them to the main town. The bridge had fallen, so we had to stop our vehicle somewhere, walked through the water. It was manageable enough and safe, so we passed through the water, got a bike that conveyed us to the community. And so that will determine the kind of survey you'll be able to do with such communities that are quite restricted. The one you are seeing in front here is somewhere we traveled in Nasarawa State to conduct a survey, and then they were telling us that once it started raining, we can't pass to town. So we started moving on the road. It started raining. We managed to go to somewhere. This vehicle couldn't come out until community people came to help rescue our vehicle. Okay, so these are things you try to consider when you are selecting your method. You are considering the population to be studied. Okay, so you check whether this population is the population you'll be able to reach via email, via telephone, via face-to-face, and then you also check whether this community has issue with language, where you have to invite people who can speak the language to manage the situation. When I did my survey, I did my survey for my PhD in Ogoni local government. During the preliminary study, by the time I visited the community, I found out that if I come there as a stranger, asking them the question I needed to ask about the socio-economic development of the community, that there would be a bias, because they all needed intervention from government, from oil company. So what we did was that I had to train enumerators who were community members to go and do this interview, and they were followed up from the background until we got all the responses we needed. All right? So these are key things you consider. The next one to consider is the sampling issue. It is important to note that sampling performs three major functions in survey design. Number one is that your sampling helps to lower the cost of data collection. Number two is that the sampling, the smaller the collection of because you are reducing the size of the persons you are going to interview, it increases the chances of being precise, the chances of getting faster information, defined information. It reduces the challenges involved. Okay, and number three is that it ensures homogeneity, given that you are looking at a smaller set of people, and by that it increases accuracy and quality of data you obtain. But in doing that, there are key questions you need to consider. Once you have selected your sample, you ask those questions. Number one, what information do we have available about this sample? What information do you have available about the sample? That will guide you. Information you have could be that you will determine the kind of enumerators you will use. It will also determine the kind of survey method you are going to use. Who is the respondent you want to interview. That is key. If you determine the respondent you want to interview, it will also guide you to know who you will be talking to. And then how easy can you assess this respondent? It may be a respondent that you will need to meet in the evening or meet very early. Sometimes when we interview farmers and they tell you this is farming season, you can't come in the morning, you come in the evening. So some of them we need to go in the evening, or you interview those you need to meet in the morning, like when we have to interview the people who have processors and farmers. So we can meet the processors in the morning where they are at their workplace, and then keep the interaction with farmers later in the evening. So, and then a respondent likely going to be, response rate likely going to be a problem. If it's going to be a problem, you find a way around it before you start. So these are things you do while planning the survey implementation. The last key thing we need to discuss here is the administrative costs. You know, when designing your survey, the key thing you need to consider is the cost of obtaining this data. The cost shouldn't be such that it becomes too expensive for research. Each survey type has associated cost implication, with some being generally expensive, while others are not expensive. So you check the budget available and be able to design what can fit in. Then you also check the availability of facilities. We had a study to do. We desired to use tablets to collect our information, but tablet wasn't available. So we had to make use of hard copies. But when facilities are available, it helps you to also determine which to use. And then the time available. If the time, you have all the time, yes, it now affects what you can do within the time. If you don't have all the time, you look for the fastest way of making sure you collect quality data. And then another key thing a lot of people don't consider often is the personnel. The kind of persons who will work with you to get this data. It's important that these personnel are trained so that everybody is on the same page. When we have funded survey to do, we spend quite a good number of time with the enumerators. First, we bring all of them. We discuss each question that you are going to ask. This question, this is what it means, so that everybody in the same team have the same interpretation for the questions. All right? And then after training them, you do your pilot survey. You take them to the field and do, maybe each of them will interview one or two persons. Then you come back and review their responses. And then be able to make certain corrections, maybe on your questionnaire, or you discover that some of the enumerators are not interpreting the question correctly. You'll be able to handle it when you have not started the main study. Then after that, you harmonize before you do the implementation. So these are basic things that are involved in sampling, determining the type of survey methods to use. And so finally, I want to note that there are a lot of issues to be considered generally in selecting the type of survey method to be used in your study. And why there are no fixed way of making this decision, by effectively considering the advantages and disadvantages involved in each of them, and applying these criteria we have discussed, the three of them you remember. Number one is what? Checking out the issue of what? Are you there? Yeah. Number one is that you consider the population, you consider the issues around the sampling, you consider administrative issues. If you consider all of these, it will be easier for you to decide on the particular survey method that will suit the project you have at hand. And on that note, we want to say a very big thank you for joining us. Do join us in the next study when we are going to look at conducting survey proper. Thank you very much for visiting and attending to this class. I remain your facilitator, Dr. Marco Achukwuojide. Have a pleasant day. Cheers.